So thank you everyone for being here. My name is Carolyn Mullen. I'm the director here at the Senior Center. And this is a brand new opportunity for us. This is a concept that Alan Brunsman came up with himself to really highlight the innovations that we've had in Yellow Springs. It's been a pretty remarkable ride here over the last few hundred years. And I think much of what Alan's going to cover tonight is some of the most incredible stuff we can say came out of Yellow Springs. But there's more to cover. And on that vein, if you yourself are aware of somebody or something that we should cover, I would love to hear about it. We're looking for more opportunities to cover more topics because we know it's kind of an endless list of things that have come out of Yellow Springs, not just in science, but lots of innovations. Joining us on Zoom, which is being recorded, are two of Leland Clark's daughters, and another of his daughters is here, Becky. And I'm sure you'll hear more about that from Alan, who's got all of the info you could want. Well, and remember, this is actually a two-part. I need to clarify. We can't cover everything in one night. So we will be bringing back Alan in June to cover the second phase, second part of this.
Then I do a second one in which we probably do some experiments or show people how the things work. Okay, well, the first part is too long. I don't know whether this will give me a third one. Okay, I'm Alan Brunsman. In Yellow Springs, I'm known as Becky's husband. What was that?
She said, sorry, but you're right.
And I worked at YSI for 28 years. Matter of fact, just came from Columbus, and moved into Yellow Springs, and I was like 68. Associated with Lee Clark for 35 years. I'll be referring to him probably in a variety of ways. I'll probably use Lee and Leland and Dr. Clark and everything else. Most likely I'll use Lee because it was just a casual relationship between me and him. First slide there is just shows Lee in a heart-lung machine. And the thing I stress, which is the Edison of medicine, father of fire sensor, something not, well, no, they strip it down, they get it down to the biosensor. And the biosensor was just basically half of his life, not the full life. And so, and the Edison part of it, Edison was, when I worked for YSI, I left in 96, okay? And I went out and did ventures over in Indianapolis for about 17 years. But I realized that I was in an unusual place. YSI and Clark were just entirely, I'm not sure many people, could understand how enriched that environment was. And so at that time, me and Dorothy Scott decided to, we did tapes, and we did Hardy Trolander, Dave Case, Ray Schiff, Chuck Kimball, and Lee.
Wow.
And they were done casual. And Lee's tape is about 2 hours long, so I will put it, try and get it out on YouTube or something like that. But it's basically, you got to be patient, and it's done casually. They're just talking about different things, and that was the idea. Make it a casual interview as opposed to a fixed interview. Okay. Through here, I'll hit different parts of that tape, and that's about what you're going to get. I'll try and put the tape out online or something like that, and see if people can watch the whole thing if they got time. This is Lee and his wife, Eleanor. She was such an integral part of his work. I mean, she literally responded to everything he did and gathered the literature for him and read the literature and told him about him. Just he was another part of him. And if you met him, you could just tell they were just, right and left hands, basically.
Science fascinates his mind. It always has. His life is a roadmap of invention and discovery that continues to leave an indelible mark on our world.
For some reason or another, I'm always attracted to the problems that if you solved it, you solved a lot of problems all at once.
Dr. Leland C. Clark is the 2005 winner of one of the top 3 prizes in engineering in the world, the Fritz J. and Dolores H. Russ Prize. Fritz and Dolores Russ founded the Russ Prize in 1999 to honor those in the engineering profession whose work benefits humanity. Leland Clark grew up in Rochester, New York during the difficult days of the Great Depression.
At the time I was growing up, whether it was depression, there really was no money for much of anything. And so if you wanted a toy, you made one. So I and my brothers made little trucks, steam shovels, and all kinds of things.
Dr. Clark attended the University of Rochester School of Medicine, planning on becoming a doctor. But in graduate school, his focus changed from medicine to research on the paradigm of a single idea.
By then I'd picked up the thought that I don't think I want to be a doctor and just treat one patient at a time and then maybe get in a fight with another doctor because I'm doing something he should be doing. And besides, it's only a one at a time deal. While if research is your aim, then you can treat 10,000 patients at once.
You saw on there was the father of biosensors or something like that. And to me, that was just a small part of the whole picture of Lee. So I like the Edison of medicine. And so for that, I just listed some of Edison's. And that gives you an idea, you know, he did a lot of different things. Okay, you know, photographs, motion pictures, light bulbs, et cetera. But again, it's a lot of different things like Edison did. And that's the idea. So I like the Edison of medicine. Okay. Lee had at least 50 US patents. And he was very prolific in writing. 200 publications is probably half of it or something like that. It just seems like every time you turn it around, he's publishing another paper. The way I structured this is to go through a timeline. So what I got in the bottom is where he lived. And the dates, I'm sure, are not absolutely correct. And then inventions and things along the line. So, you know, he came to Antioch after graduating from college in 44 and stayed here until 58. Went to Alabama and worked there. Went to Cincinnati research place in that period. Came back to Yellow Springs in Antioch then and worked for SBI, still in Yellow Springs.
What was his association with it?
Chairman of the biochemistry department at Fells Institute on Antioch campus. So that was the tie-in. She said they were two associations affiliated.
Right, so Yellow Springs, Antioch College, Fells, 1944. For those of you that don't know, that's the Fells building. There's some of Fells, what their challenge was, and the overview of Fells longevity study. Is there anybody here that was in the study? Aha! I wondered if I would get one. The study.
Susan and John, I'm sure were too.
Pardon?
Susan and John, I think, were in it too.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe Linda too.
Basically, the study, decades to write valuable information. They accepted people, tell me if I'm wrong. Somebody said it. They accepted people into it and they plotted them for their whole life. And obviously the data is still going here.
But they were also using extremely precise measurements at Fells. In other words, like, you go to your doctor's office and you step on the scale, but how much, body fat and muscle and all the rest of the mutants and, water, they were measuring those weights in a very precise manner and collecting a lot of data in that regard, a lot more.
Yeah, and when Fells shut down the building, the data's supposed to have gone to Wright State. Now, what they did with it, I have no idea. So one of the first things he did there was he developed an artificial kidney. Okay, blood comes in one side, it goes through a cellophane membrane, and the waste goes out the other side. It's basics of an artificial kidney for dialysis. This is a picture of somebody on a dialysis machine. They're taking blood from them, running them through a filter, come back, put it back into them. people hate that.
With your early ones, washing machines?
That's another point that, in the Korean War, somewhere between 1950 and 53, Dr. Kriff decided that he needed a dialysis machine for the soldiers because they had so many kidney problems. And he made one. And the story, made up story, also talked about that on a MASH series.
Okay.
So, you know, you can go look at the MASH series and see about making a dialysis machine. Okay, this is, just give some numbers. Shows 2 million people, without reading every word of it. 2 million people receive dialysis treatment each year. Approximately 500,000 new patients every time. And 200,000 students, no patients each year. You know, he had the possibility of doing something with that, you know, he had this part of it. But the people at Fells didn't think it fit into their charge. Okay, so they wouldn't let him follow through. So he may have been the person that came up with the machine and everything like that, and had all those customers, you know, blah, blah, blah. But he didn't because Fells didn't want it. It's behind the Fells building. Antioch's using it for the maintenance department. Okay, in that building, they developed the heart lung machine.
I have a comment from Joan saying that Leland's father had heart disease and that she thinks this is part of what motivated him to figure out how heart surgery could be improved.
Could be. He did a lot of, for a variety of people, they would give him samples of animals, organs, and they wanted to use them for testing. And he had the assignment of keeping them alive. And so, you know, here he came to the realization, well, I can keep these things alive. Maybe I can keep a heart alive. So that was sort of the motivation for getting into it. In a heart lung machine, you got something to do oxygenation, something to do with circulation, something to do temperature control. They use it in cardiac surgery and emergency situations. Here's components. You have a pump, an oxygenator, heat exchanger, a reservoir, tubing. Right. The function of the oxygenator is obvious. Put oxygen in, CO2 out. Circulation, move the flow around, and temperature control. You're moving a person's body, blood around, and you have control of his temperature, basically. It has advantages for doing the surgery.
Was a machinist at Fells. He was one of the 4 founders of Yellow Springs Instrument Company. I think he was one of the 4 guys that started.
Originally 3 and then 4, yeah.
So did he come in later, or?
Dave Case was later, and he was one of the original.
One of the original ones. And he was a free soul, you know. He didn't like to be confined to a job-like thing. And when it came time to make the heart lung machine, as you can see from this picture, there was a lot of metal work that had to be done. And I decided we'd make everything of a certain type of stainless steel, and he knew how to do that on the lathe. It's not easy. You take a piece of stainless steel rod that's certain kind of, that's what they make jail bars out of. You can take a hacksaw and saw all day and you won't even scratch it. But you know, on a lathe, if you get the settings right, you can just peel it down. So anyway, he was a good machinist. But he didn't want to work during the daytime. Because, you know, he wanted to be a free soul. So he'd work at night. So that was perfect for me, because I didn't do any work on the heart lung machine during Fells working hours, because they would have thrown me out the window and been broken glass everywhere. Made me pay for the window, probably. But so I could say, well, John, I don't know, it ought to be this big around, you know, and maybe we could have the valve of a wafer and like this. So he'd make it during the night. Usually it'd be on Thursday nights, then or Friday nights, and then I'd pick it up 6 in the morning or 7. He'd still be there, say, and maybe sometime just finishing it. and I'd take it in the car and go to Cincinnati, and that's where we tried out, so. I'm not sure how long that went on, but it was well over a year. That was just almost getting into a routine. And John was, and Dean Kimball would make the electronics part. And John was, he only came down to Cincinnati with me once. To him, it was a place where this was going on with dogs and stuff. I don't think I could have gotten all the way there without a John Benedict, and there was only one John Benedict around that I knew of. It's very hard to get somebody to make things on a lathe. When I started to do it in Birmingham, there was some articles in the paper, and a guy named Whittington came up to see me and said, "Do you need a machinist?" And I was wondering, oh God, what am I going to do? I came here with, about 2/3 of a machine. I said, "Do I need a machinist?" I said, "Do you have a lathe?" He said, "No, but there's but I know the guy that teaches the deaf and blind school, and they have a huge lathe there." So he said, "I'll get on their faculty." So that's how we got it started.
So if you're gonna build something like this, look at it. I mean, this is only the plumbing and oxygenator and so on and so forth. It's a lot of work. Okay, now we're talking about the guy at Fells who has no machinery, no electronics, and he wants to develop this thing. I mean, I've developed, I don't know how many, maybe 20 or 30 different things. And part of it, he talks about getting somebody into it, this John Benedict. Okay, I'm sure he didn't pay him a cent. So you got this guy's working with you, and it's just amazing that he could do this. I mean, it's just, what else can I say? This is a picture of the machine again. YSI thermometer there. Various oxygen cylinders. This is again operation. To qualify to use it on a human, they set up a criteria that they had to do 100 animals, perfect, with no problems in between.
Joan is commenting also online. She said, before the invention of the heart-lung machine, open heart surgery could only be done on a functioning heart. Very
Right.
difficult, as you can imagine.
So you can imagine trying to stitch up something or change a vein or something like that on something. It's bleeding. So that's criteria why it. This is a picture of a later model of the oxygenator. And you notice it's all glass. I think this is probably one they produced. I'll say when. Okay, what happens is blood comes in here and oxygen comes in here, and there's a porous disc, and it forms very small bubbles, and the bubbles go up through the blood. And then up here, there's glass beads coated, and it's a defoaming agent, and it takes the bubbles out of the solution. Bubbles go out, the vinegar goes out the top, the blood comes back here and goes down. So that's a, there's the that's the debubbler. This is something I didn't know. YSI for 2 years produced a heart lung machine. It sold it. I had no idea they had a product. And I'm assuming it's the final model that Lee came up with. And it was, they bragged about it because you could sterilize it. And that was one of the attributes of that device, was that you can sterilize it. And you want to sterilize it between operation. And the bubbler is very efficient. Okay, manufacturers of heart lung machines, quite a few people manufacture.
Did he patent it?
No.
No.
Okay, this gives you an idea of how many surgeries, 200, 400,000 annually.
And now, by the way, they're performed pretty much everywhere, even in community hospitals. It used to be you'd have to go to a big medical center. And certainly when spaces are big,
you know, just getting there was a problem and so on, but nowadays it's pretty standard procedure.
Yeah, even COVID, they used them for echo. And it's basically, you're doing the same thing, except you do it all external and the heart keeps going. So because your lungs are tied up with the COVID, you want to get still oxygen in the blood, so they use the machine to move oxygen into the blood.
Another comment from Joan, she says one of the first applications was in mending heart defects in newborn babies, known as at that time as blue babies. Hundreds of these babies were saved using this machine.
The first person, the first person that they operated on in Cincinnati was a fireman. And
lung damage.
yeah, absolutely.
I've done more work earlier, actually. I've been going out to San Francisco and where John Severingham was with the CO2 electrode, and that was, I think, their first use in clinical setting. It was for 6 months, and that was fascinating. And I was very involved in that job, and it was to use in heart surgery and post-operatively. And I found myself within about 3 weeks being in the position of an 18-year-old who knew more about blood gas and the post-operative course than anybody in the world. And, you know, how to tell surgeons, look, this patient's gonna die if you don't do this or this. And then they started having to go all around the hospital because the physician with texts about the dying of the track for her years. And so I thought, well, 15 hours a day. That's politics of the yeah.
Susan, the oxygen electrode in a way was your ticket to John Severnhouse.
Right.
And then from there you went to work for a physiologist in Canada who was interested in lung function and oxygen and things like that. He's a very famous physiologist. How long did you?
3 months. Actually, that job was boring. All I did was calculations on oxygen uptake during the stress test. That was before computers. That was before calculators did anything but add and subtract every time.
Then from there, you went to another laboratory, France, where also the main thing was oxygen metabolism and lung function, right?
Yeah. They did surgery on a dog 2 times a week. And I taught them to use the oxygen electrode, and then I introduced it to other hospitals.
You get a little bit of the background. Susan, well, Lee became experts on blood gas. And in the world, because of what they've done with the heart lung machine and so forth. And she ended up being sent around the world to help people. And I love the comment on, here's an 18-year-old going into a hospital. Susan's very confident, by the way.
She grew up here in Mill Springs.
You can imagine.
She was there just for her senior year. But otherwise she went to Dunbar. And then she came back to Antioch after 1 year.
But you get an 18-year-old telling these doctors what to do with these situations, you can imagine, especially a woman, right? Okay.
She wanted to go to medical school. None of them would take her because she was a woman. Oh, yeah.
Oh, I don't have it on this.
No, most of them wouldn't.
She talks about interviewing for medical school, and it's just absurd what they would ask her, when was your last period? Have you had sex? Well, anyway. Out of the heart lung machine, there became a need for an oxygen sensor. A little bit of history is that Lee ran a test, published the article, And the people he tried to publish the article. They wouldn't publish the article because he didn't show the oxygen tension in the blood when the device was being measured. So this is, somebody said I can't measure the oxygen in the blood, then okay, I'll make an invention to measure oxygen.
Yeah, don't tell me.
Don't tell me what I can't. Yeah, literally. Yeah.
So that,
You understand what we're talking about here as far as the electrode, how it works. You have a membrane here that only lets gases through, okay? That's the cigarette paper. This. And in here, you got a solution and two electrodes, platinum or gold there. And silver over here. You run a voltage between them and you measure the current that goes through the solution. And the current is proportional to the oxygen. And why the Teflon, why the membrane? It keeps other things out and the water in. And people knew that you could measure oxygen in a beaker with this arrangement. But he came up with this little bit here, and it's amazing. That's the patent. Now we're in the patents on that. And it's basically that drawing I just showed you. The name stuck, a Clark oxygen electrode. And if you talk about this at any time, you refer to the Clark oxygen electrode, which is amazing. Not many things have that. Choose medical, environmental, and research. The medical, you can see Harlan machines, et cetera, et cetera. Environmental, YSI's had a whole product line using oxygen environment measurements. You got fish like to know fish will live or die depending on how much oxygen is in the water. So you got to go around and measure that kind of thing. So, and research is the handy measurement. Also, out of that hard lung machine, as I did very much earlier in the slides, they had to know the temperature. They wanted to control the temperature. Okay, so they had to come up with a temperature measurement. The temperature they started out with was a mercury glass thermometer. And you can imagine trying to control something. Well, anyway, just you can imagine. Okay, temperature measurement is very, very vital component and bypass situation. Okay, you need to measure temperature in the surgical situation. You got to keep the person to a certain temperature. You don't want to go low, high, and you want to bring them out of it. Why do you have temperature? Metabolic control, protection of the organs, controlling cooling and heating and rewarming, improves surgical conditions, blood viscosity, reducing complications. So you can read more detail on that, but it's basically all that's dependent on the temperature. I love this part. I have the video of Hardy, and he talks about first temperature probe. Hardy was involved in the hard lung machine, and he described it one way, and then on the video I have, Lee describes it another way. So, I don't want to get in the fight. It's just different. But basically, they got a ceramic cylinder, ceramic piece that responded to temperature, okay? And mounted wires on it. I think that again was Kimball that did that stuff. And hooked it up to a meter through a bridge, Wheatstone bridge. And it would respond to the change in temperature. And they had to calibrate it, okay? So they would take the probe and put it in a bath, controlled temperature bath. And then this meter would go to a certain place. And they had, this is where they differ, they had smoked the meter. And they just, here it is at 98.6 and scratch the meter. Here's another temperature, scratch the meter. And that's how they controlled the temperature. And here's another shot of it. Basically, here's the ceramic piece, electrical contact connected to it, and epoxy over it. And YSI made those forever. And the way YSI calibrated them is they ground one of the sides so you can change the resistance by making it a smaller piece. And until they put it in a bath with one that they knew the characteristics of, and they ground it until it matched that one. And that was the way they did it. Yeah. And so, you know, this is another example of a skin probe. Matter of fact, I have a probe back there. Oh, yeah, grab it. Too bad. YSI's uses for the thermistors. YSI started producing and mass producing them, but again, they made a lot of money. YSI didn't follow through with the link machine. Why was that? YSI at the time when all this stuff was doing was probably, 10, 20 people, Okay, they did it for environmental monitoring, aquaculture, laboratory research, industrial applications, and heating and air conditioning. Food safety, healthcare, metrology. What was the features? Accurate, predictable range, and durable. Another one of my tapes is on Ray Schiff. And Ray Schiff told stories about thermistors. Okay. And one of them was that he had an application where a person wanted one of them and he was going to go around Africa measuring body temperatures of elephants. Okay, where do you put to measure the body temperature of an elephant? Carefully. Yeah, that's one of the best answer. And also that as Rob was saying, the space, every one of the astronauts ended up at the same measurement point. And they literally thought YSI was a pain in the ass. And I'll bet they're still using it. And I'll bet there's thermistors on the moon and on all space flights. It's just a handy device. Another measurement is blood gas. And for blood gas, you need at least three things. You need to measure oxygen. So you have the Clark oxygen electrode. You need CO2. Well, you heard John Severinghaus and a few of these things. Well, John Severinghaus was a very famous inventor. Okay, he invented a CO2 electrode. Maybe Rob can do the chemistry of it. Basically, they measure pH of a chemical that reacts with CO2 and it changes the pH. And it's very similar to the Clark electrode, but it's measuring pH instead of a current change. So what do you get out of it? They make a machine that takes these things and connects them together and gives you all, these are the kind of readings you get. If you're measuring what's going on, you want to know what pH is because the cells react differently because you're trying to measure the amount of oxygen there. But this is a list of things you can measure with a blood gas machine. And I downloaded this list off an AI program and it had lactose in there. But saying that the machines now do measure lactose. Okay. And if you watch these medical shows, they'll have, somebody's in trouble. Oh, get his lactate. That's another. Also, YSI invented that with Lee's help. It's a few of the things you can do with a blood gas instrument. How many of these are measured? How many times? 23 million blood gas are performed each year. Again, if you watch the medical shows, the guy comes in trouble, they get a blood gas. Matter of fact, there was a box that we found out in YSI, and it was the first of the prototype of the first blood gas instrument. I don't know whether it's still there or they threw it out or whatever it was. And YSI then had the opportunity, much like the heart lung machine, to produce blood gas instruments. And they looked at that, and it's a very complicated measure. You've got oxygen, carbon dioxide, pH. You got a lot of standards for all this. People go to school for a long time to learn how to run these machines. So YSI, again, small company, didn't think they could handle it, so they didn't do it. Here's a list of people that make them. So back to this chart, he goes to Alabama. He brought the heart lung machines to make them. He was talking about in that thing where he had a machinist, found the machinist. Again, you make these things, the guy joins this school so he can get to the lathe so they can make heart lung machines. When you're in the early stages of products, you do it any way you can. midnight hours and whatever. He also designed an operating room and recovery room for heart operations. Okay, this is the description of the intensive care unit that he built. And his thought, he talks about it again on the tape, and he was a little irritated with doctors in that they'd come in and do the heart lung operation. And you've probably been there. And when they got done, they'd say, "Oh, close it up and go home." You know, they didn't monitor the patient after that. No, the nurses can handle that. You know, everybody else can handle that. I've done my part. So Lee designed a intensive care unit that would handle the patients after they came out of surgery. And this is about as best as I could with pictures. I still don't think it's standard if you want the truth. Monitor the patient after surgery. He also played around with a hyperbaric chamber. You want a hyperbaric chamber? You got a lot of knots. Okay, you're pressurized, put a person in a pressurized chamber. Okay, you can use it for decompression sickness, CO2 poisoning, wound healings, cerebral palsy, traumatic brain injuries, infections, sickle cells, burns, respiratory conditions. They're using it now. It gets oxygen to where you want it to be. Burn patients, yeah. Almost instantaneously put them in there. He developed a patent on a pump. I'm not sure it was ever used, but it had a lot of characteristics that were good. Okay, now we get into liquid breathing.
Now, if you take water and cooking oil, right? Or half and half, shake it up, they'll settle out, oil will come to the top. And nothing will go into the water later. If you put silicone oil in there, you can shake it up, and the silicone will be here. Cooking oil will be here, and the water will be on the bottom. Well, it's possible if you're smart enough in the physical chemistry of materials to have as many as 12 different compounds, none of which is soluble in the other, and so on. So you can shake up these and get at least 11, probably 12 separate layers, which is an incredibly interesting thing to me still is. So one of the experiments I do would be like that. I tried to save these tubes with the different liquids, you know, they always kind of stored. So he thought they'd be like. So anyway, I decided, I found to my total surprise that certain silicone compound oil would dissolve in fluorocarbon oil. So that way I could make a mixture of the two. Fluorocarbon liquids are very heavy. They just sink to the bottom of the beaker. Silicone oils are very light. They float to the top of water. So I thought, and it was the beginning of thinking that the cost of zooming out with a rocket with a man on board is all pulmonary, because basically, I don't know how many G's are not in that. That limits how fast you can take off, how many G's you can put on a man, and that's limited by the fact that his guts, if you want to put it that way, pull down like this, because his lungs are filled with air. So you might say in too many G's, the body pulls away from his lungs, say, and he can't breathe. If you could take off, and not here I'm zooming off, or I don't know much at all, but if you could, the cost of a rocket decreases if you can have a higher velocity to take off. The higher that velocity is, the cheaper it is to actually do the whole thing with it. So I could not get it out of my mind that it would be nice if you could have a liquid that an astronaut could breathe during takeoff that had the same specific gravity as his body. So our next silicone norm and fluorocarbon norm of a certain structure of silicone. And it mixed. And it had a specific gravity of water.
So he did an experiment, which I actually got a video on, which can go into maybe the next session, that shows taking a mouse and putting him in this liquid with oxygen bubbling in it. And the mouse has a little problem when he first goes in there, but he settles down and just breathes normally.
Yeah.
And they've done it for quite a bit of time. So it's a neat experiment. And Steven Spielberg heard about this experiment. And in the movie The Abyss, they actually do the experiment. And so Steven, call him Steven, contacted Lee and said, you know, what can I do to pay you whatever to get this to happen? And Lee said, well, just autograph this picture. Yeah, that'll be enough. And so here, picture comes back and it says, squeak, Steven Spielberg. And the reason for the liquid breathing in the abyss was they had to go very deep. And like Lee was talking about crushing somebody with takeoff with cheese, the same problem if you're going very deep and you have a lot of force from the water, it'll crush you. But if you have your lungs filled with liquid, the same density as you, it has been done. No, it's just, I would think if it wasn't such a, you're gonna do what to me? There's many uses for this, you know, neonatal medicine for babies, you know, newborns, their lungs tend to stick together. And so you use it to cure that, critical care medicine, acute respiratory failure, emergency and rescue. I was watching the show the other day and they're talking about a person that drowned. They're getting him out of the water. You know, well, you know, if you had liquid there, you know, you could just pump it in and force the water out and supply oxygen at the same time. And that would probably save people pretty fast. And Lee also claimed that the particles used in this medicine was much smaller than the red blood cell. And it'll go places that red blood cells won't go. And so, for example, in COVID, you could pump it in, it would help mucus coming out and go in there and supply oxygen. I sent a letter to the governor, I sent a letter to all kinds of people and never got a response, of course. Who am I? But I think they could have saved a lot of people. The other thing he came up with was artificial blood and started to work on that. And this is not what it looks like. In 1960 in Alabama and continued to work until his death. He joined SBI. And part of the trick with it is that you put the fluorocarbon liquid into this saline solution. And to get it in, you use it similar to how they make milk. Get rid of the butter fat on top. They run through an emulsifier. Okay. It's basically forcing it through a small hole, as I recall. That's right. It was one in the Kettering building, you couldn't figure out what to do. And when you do that, it makes very small particles like we were talking about. And it stays in the liquid, much like butter stays in the milk. You get a constant solution. And it looks like milk. Some of the things that you talked about in the mouse experiments is when you do that with the mice, you're not doing blood, but you get them breathing the liquid. They have pink eyes to start with, but as they get this liquid, which doesn't have color to it, their eyes turn clear. And their skin, you know, just, okay. It doesn't have type. And it stores at room temperature. So yeah, talk about battlefield conditions. You know, people, the first thing they give you is an IV of saline, basically. All that's doing is adding volume to it. It's not supplying anything that'll keep you alive. You really need something to carry oxygen. That's the first thing you're going to need. And so, you know, that's what this would be great for. Again, a battlefield situation, everybody could carry one. It's non-tight and storable.
Yeah.
Oh, well. we can figure out a lot of things. This was given at Lee's Memorial by Harvey Trulander. It was a very interesting story. 1970, Lee and Fred Hooven and me, Harvey Trulander. He was invited, Lee Clark invited him to his house for a demonstration. And what he did is take two beakers. One with just sugar water in it, and the other was an enzyme. Okay, so he's got glucose oxidase with an enzyme, and a beaker with sugar in it, and two wires in that beaker. So he's sitting here, and he pours the glucose oxidase into that beaker, and he gets a reading. It's a simple experiment, but that started the whole enzyme probe biosensor. Fred Hooven helped start YSI. He was an Antioch student. He went off, did many things. He did the radio directional signal that's still used today. He was quite an inventor. As I recall, he worked for Ford, or one of them. They invented the 5-way tailgate. You remember those that flapped down or opened up? He did that. Okay, so there's this story he used to tell where he went out to lunch, and he drove out to lunch, and he drove this Cadillac out to lunch. And he went inside, got done, came outside, and there's a woman standing beside the thing, really tore up. She says, "I backed into your car." She's all worried about this nice Cadillac, and she's backed into it. And he looks at her and says, "Oh, don't worry about it. We're going to crush it tomorrow." Crush it tomorrow. It was a prototype. They can't keep prototypes. You don't want to get out in the public and see whatever happens to them. So they literally crushed them. That's enough story. Yeah, that's cool. So I'd like to quit here.